All right, so now that our front end is loading data successfully from our back end, really the only thing we have left to do is implement the other operations that we want our front end to perform. Okay, so we already have our create to do, complete to do, delete to do, those functions set up. So we're just going to need to go into our backend and create those corresponding endpoints and make sure that they manipulate the data accordingly. And then we can just do essentially the same kind of function call inside each of these functions. So let's head over to our backend, and we're going to add 3 more endpoints here. So the first one is going to be for creating to-dos. Now we've been using app.get when we just want to load data from a given endpoint. But the fact is that that's just one of a lot of different options for different request types that we can accept on the back end. So what I mean by that is generally when we do things like create data, we're going to want to use post requests. And the reason we do that is because post requests contain what's called a request body or a request payload, which allows the front end to include extra data along with its request. So what I mean by that, you'll see what I mean by that. We're going to create this endpoint as app.post. And for the path here, we'll have /todos, just like we had for app.get. Again, this is just a RESTful convention here. And these two won't interfere with each other because they're different kinds of requests. So you can have a GET request endpoint and a POST request endpoint with the same path. And for the callback here, what we're going to be doing is basically having our front end send the text of the new to-do. Okay, so the new text or whatever we end up calling it. It's going to include this inside its request when it sends it to our server. Okay? So basically what our server is going to do is it's going to access the value of new text and use that to insert another item into our fake to-dos array up here. Okay? So here's what that's going to look like. The way that we access extra data on our request object is simply by saying const, and then we'll say something like new to do text equals request.body. All right, so request.body basically contains all of the extra information that the client side has sent along with its post request. And in order for this to work, I swear you will spend a lot of time pulling your hair out trying to figure out what the problem is if you miss this. I know I certainly have. In order to get this request.body thing to work, you actually have to go up here under where we create our app and say app.useExpress.json. Basically, what this tells Express to do is when it sees a post request with a JSON request payload, it will actually take that, parse it, and add it to request.body here down in our callbacks. If you forget to do that, all that you'll see is that request.body will be undefined. And if you just Google that right now, you'll see that there are a lot of people who have asked that very same question. So anyway, that is the new to-do text. What we need to do next is just create a new item that will insert into our fake to-dos array up here. So what we're going to do, we're going to say const new to-do. The text for that to-do is going to be the new to-do text. Is completed is going to be set to false at the beginning. And for the ID, we're going to need to generate that randomly, and the way that we do that is usually by using a package called UUID. Okay, so basically this just generates random unique IDs that have a very, very low possibility of colliding. So we're going to hit enter, and that will install that package for us. And the way that we're going to use that is by saying const UUID equals require UUID. And then to generate an ID down here, what we're going to do is we're going to say ID UUID.v4 and just call that as a function which will generate a new ID for us. It's a little bit weird looking like that, but that will generate a random ID for our new to-do. Okay, so now that we have our new to-do, we're just going to push it onto this array here. And let's just change this to let since we're going to want to modify it. Not that JavaScript cares if it's const or let when it comes to modifying arrays and objects, but that's another story for later on. So the way that we're going to do that is by saying fake to-dos.push and push our new to-do onto that array. Now, as far as the response that we're going to send back to the client here, Usually what's considered to be a pretty good practice from create endpoints is to actually return the to-do that you just created, right? This will allow the client side to get the ID that we assigned on the server. So what we're going to do is say response.json and send back the new to-do to the client side. Okay, so if we restart our server now, in order to make those changes take effect, we're going to say node source/server.js. If we go back to our front end now and implement this create to-do function, here's what it's going to look like. We're going to say const response equals await axios.post, right? Because remember, we want to make a post request here so that we can include extra data. And that post request is going to be to /todos, and the extra data that we include as the request body is going to be new to-do text, to-do text, right? That's that argument that we're getting inside this function here. And once we have the response, right, which remember is going to contain the new to-do we just created, what that's going to look like is we're going to say const new to-do equals response.data, and we're going to set our to-dos to all of our existing to-dos with that new to-do added onto the end. So the way we can do that is by saying to-dos.concat new to-do. All right. And one thing that I just realized when I was typing this out here is that we need to actually get our new to-do text from request.body.new to-do text. Okay, so this body here is essentially whatever object we pass as a second argument when we make the request from the client side. All right, so let's restart our server again just to make that change take effect. And it should be running. And let's run our front end as well. Oh, here, we need to actually make these asynchronous because they are using the await keyword inside of it. So just so I don't forget, I'll add it to all of them. Okay, and let's give this a try now. We're going to go back to our front end in the browser. We're going to enter a new to-do item. So we'll say something like, add a post endpoint. Click on create. And sure enough, we see that the add a post endpoint shows up, and it's persisted if we refresh our front end, which means that we're getting that successfully loaded from the back end. And that's how we create new resources in a full stack way. One last thing I want to point out here is that while we're just pushing a new to-do onto an in-memory array inside our backend right now, this will eventually be the job of the database. So this will be replaced with the corresponding MongoDB method when we get there. Right? We're just doing this right now because it's a lot easier for the time being. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.